Now, we know that to be a joint heir with Christ is not equal to being a child, because the only condition for being a child is to believe in Jesus. But the condition for being a joint heir is quite different. The condition for being a joint heir is to suffer with him, and that's not the same as just simply believing. And I'm going to elaborate more on what it means to suffer with him later in this message, but first I want to focus on what does it mean to be a joint heir with Christ. I think the immediate explanation we have is to be glorified with Christ. You're a joint heir with Christ if you're also glorified together with Christ. Now, what does it mean to be glorified together with him? I think what we have to do here is think about how Christ was glorified. And to do that, we need to first go back to what Jesus referred to in words found in John chapter 17 when he said this: "The glory which I had before the world was." Jesus is God. He lived in eternity past. He existed in heaven before this world was created. And he had the glory of God there in heaven, in the presence of God the Father and God the Spirit. Jesus is a glorious God who had that glory before this world was even created. The day came that Jesus left heaven, came to this earth, humbled himself in the form of a man, submitted himself to death where he died on the cross, paying for the sins of the world. He was buried, he rose again, and he ascended back to heaven. When he went back to heaven, something fantastic, something glorious happened, and that is that Jesus received an even greater glory in heaven than he had before he left. We know that because of what we read in the book of Revelation, chapter 5, referring to Jesus in heaven since he has died and risen and ascended. Here's what we read: "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive glory." That's what's being said about Jesus now in heaven. And it will be said about Jesus forever and ever that he is the Lamb who was slain. That's a reference to Jesus as the one who laid down his life in payment for our sins. That's a reference to Jesus who loved us so much with a sacrificial love that he would give of himself for us only because he loved us, not because we deserved it. And he's going to be glorified, he's going to be praised as the Lamb who was slain forever and ever. And with that comes a glory. Listen, it's a glory that goes beyond the glory that he had before he came to this earth. Let me put it this way. Jesus had a basic glory in his person, the Son of God. But because of his suffering, he now has a bonus glory, a greater glory, because of the suffering that he went through for you and me. All right, with that background, let's go back to our anchor verse for this message, and it's this: Romans 8:17. "If children, then heirs, heirs of God." Every child of God has a basic heirship, a basic glory that they will receive from our Father on a future day. But among the children of God, some of those children of God will receive a bonus glory. Just like Jesus received a bonus glory, some of God's children will receive a greater inheritance and a greater glory as they become heirs with Christ and as they become glorified together with him. Now, I'm pausing right now to let you think about that for a moment, because my guess is that you might be thinking something like this: I can get into that. I'm for that. I want that. I want that basic inheritance. I want to be set free from this bondage of corruption. I want to experience the glorious liberty that's awaiting me on a future day. I can relate to that. But maybe you're thinking, but this, I can't relate to that too well because I'm not really looking for a lot of glory. I just want basic glory in the future. I don't need that bonus glory. And I understand that. I can understand why you might think that. And Paul understands why you might think that because he really hasn't explained what this glory is. I mean, if Paul or Jesus or someone would explain what this glory is, maybe we'd think different about it. Maybe we'd think, oh man, I want to experience this bonus glory. I want to be a joint heir with Christ. I want to be glorified together with Christ. So, Paul, can you help us? Paul would say, yeah, it's in the next verse. Here's what I want to tell you. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed to us. What Paul is saying is, if you suffer with Christ, you will gain and receive a glory that isn't worthy to be compared with the sufferings that it took to earn it. What Paul's trying to say here is, this glory that I'm talking about is so great, so awesome, that if you just could begin to understand what it is, you would say, I want to experience that. And it's worth it to me to do whatever it takes in this life to gain that glory in a future life. Now, I want to share an illustration with you that at least helps me to maybe focus or to think more about what Paul's saying here. This illustration is built on this middle line, which is really the key to the verse, in my opinion. Not worthy to be compared. Those words are the key to the verse. Not worthy to be compared. Now here's my illustration. Some of you have heard this before, so you're going to get to hear it again. Let's suppose that I need a ride to Dallas this Monday to the airport to catch a plane. And I need somebody to give me a ride. So I make an appeal in this message to say, hey, if you're out there and you can help me, give me a ride to Dallas on Monday, I sure would appreciate it. Just let me know. And you might hear that plea and you might think, I hope Bob makes it. Sounds like he really needs a ride. I'd like to help him, but I'm pretty tied up on Monday, and besides that, that's just a lot of trouble. I got too many other things to tackle that. I hope somebody helps Bob get there, but I don't think that's for me. And I would understand that. That's a lot to ask if someone would give me a ride to Dallas. That's a big thing to do. But let's suppose you found out that I was going to reward the person that gave me a ride to Dallas with $1 million. What would your response be if you knew that I was going to give $1 million to the person that gave me a ride? I think you'd be on the phone right now during the message, trying to get first in line to reach me. Because you would figure out a way to do it. You would cancel everything and put that first because you would be thinking, you know, something's not worthy to be compared. Giving you a ride to Dallas isn't worthy to be compared with what you're willing to reward me for doing it. And you would be right. $1 million isn't worthy to be compared with what it would take for you to do that for me. Now, that illustrates, I believe, what Paul is saying here. What God has for you in terms of this bonus inheritance, this being glorified with Jesus, isn't worthy to be compared with what it would take to gain it. When you get there someday and you find out what it is, you will say that. Why? What God offered me in terms of this reward isn't worthy to be compared with what it took to earn it. So, hopefully what Paul says in verse 18 is helpful to you, as it's been to me, to try to gain a better understanding of the importance of being a joint heir with Christ and being glorified with him in a greater way on a future day. But maybe we need a little more help. Maybe we would say to Paul, Paul, this is good. That's helpful. But Paul, tell me more. What is this being glorified with Christ? What is this being a joint heir with Christ? Could you tell me more? And maybe Paul would say, as I'm about to say, well, Jesus explains it real well. In fact, as I read through the New Testament, I would say Jesus explains it the best. In fact, I want to show you 3 passages where Jesus helps us to understand, I think, even better what Paul is referring to in Romans 8. Let's start with these words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 20. Jesus said this, "To sit on my right hand and on my left is for those for whom it is prepared by my Father." Jesus is telling us that someday in the future kingdom, there are going to be those on his right and on his left. Some are going to be closer to him than others. Now, don't misunderstand this. Every child of God will be in the presence of Jesus in that future kingdom. But some of the children of God will be closer to Jesus. That's what it means to be a joint heir with Christ. That's what it means to be glorified together with him. Because the closer you are to him, the greater the glory you will experience on that day, a day that will last forever. All right, here are some more words of Jesus found in the book of Revelation, chapter 3, verse 21, where Jesus says, "To him who overcomes, I will grant to sit with me on my throne." Now, the overcomer in the book of Revelation is the Christian who has had a close walk with Jesus. And what Jesus is saying here is the overcoming Christian will sit with me on my throne. That means that overcomer is going to be pretty close to Jesus. What Jesus is saying again is, every child of God will be in his presence in the future kingdom. But some believers will be closer to Jesus, and that's what it means to have a greater inheritance, to be a joint heir with Christ, to experience a greater glory in that future kingdom. And here's one more reference that Jesus makes in the book of Revelation when he says, "To him who overcomes, I will give him the morning star." Jesus, I am the bright and morning star. The overcomer is the Christian that has walked close to Jesus in this life. What Jesus is saying, that believer will have more of me. I will give him the morning star, but I am the bright and morning star. See, once again, this is the 3rd time we've seen it. Every child of God will be in the presence of Jesus forever. But some of the children of God will be closer to Jesus. They will experience Jesus in a deeper, fuller way. They are the ones who gain the greater inheritance of being a joint heir with Jesus and experience the greater glory that experience brings. So with that background, let's go back to our main verse for this morning. If children, then heirs, heirs of God. Every child of God will have a basic inheritance, and it's a great inheritance. But among the children of God, some of those children will be joint heirs with Christ if we suffer with him, that we may also be glorified together with him. Now, I've tried to explain what it means to be a joint heir and to be glorified. But as I said earlier, I want to come back to this line right here. If we suffer with him, because that's the key line. This is the condition upon which all of that will be experienced. If we suffer with him. Well, what does it mean to suffer with him?